January 29th, 2019. Chicago, 2 in the morning. A famous Hollywood actor walks alone through the frozen streets of the city when two hooded men brutally attack him. They throw a chemical substance in his face. They put a rope around his neck. They scream racist and homophobic slurs. They leave him lying in the snow as they run away shouting that this was Trump country. Sounds like a shocking hate crime, doesn't it? A tragedy that exposed the darkest side of America. Politicians gave outraged speeches. The FBI opened an investigation. The media covered the case 24 hours a day. But what if I told you that absolutely none of this happened the way it was reported? What if this entire story was an elaborate lie? A performance so well planned that it fooled millions of people around the world? Stay until the end, because what you are about to discover about this case will completely change your perspective on everything we see in the media. To understand this story, you first need to know who Jussie Smollett was in 2019. He was a rising star in Hollywood. The main character on the hit TV series Empire, one of the most popular shows on American television. Young black gay and an activist for civil rights, he was seen as an important voice in the fight against prejudice. Smollett came from a family of activists. His mother was involved in civil rights movements. His siblings were also actors and activists. He had built his entire public image around being a voice for the oppressed and marginalized communities. But behind this public image, Smollett was facing serious problems. Industry rumors said his role on the series would be reduced in the next season. He was reportedly dissatisfied with his salary of $65,000 per episode, which might sound like a lot, but was significantly less than his white co-stars were earning. There were also personal issues. Friends described him as increasingly frustrated with what he saw as lack of recognition for his activism. He felt that despite his efforts to raise awareness about discrimination, he wasn't getting the platform or respect he deserved. And it was in this context of professional disappointment and personal frustration that the events of January 29th would unfold. But before we get to that night, let me tell you about what Chicago was like in January 2019. The city was experiencing one of the worst polar vortex events in decades. Temperatures had dropped to -9 degrees Fahrenheit. That's -23 Celsius for our international viewers. The city was practically deserted. Even the Postal Service had suspended deliveries because it was too dangerous to be outside. Most people were staying indoors with their heating systems running at maximum capacity. It was the kind of cold that could cause frostbite in minutes. Now imagine this setting. A famous actor decides to leave his luxury apartment at 2 a.m. to walk to a Subway sandwich shop. Not order delivery, mind you, but actually walk outside in sub-zero temperatures to get food. Already this doesn't make much sense, does it? But according to Smollett, that's exactly what happened. He left his apartment in the Streeterville neighborhood of Chicago and walked toward the nearest Subway. He was talking on the phone with his manager Brandon Moore throughout most of the walk. This phone call would later become crucial evidence because it provided a timeline of events. According to phone records, Smollett was on the call from 2:01 a.m. to 2:09 a.m. The attack allegedly happened right after the call ended. Smollett claims that as he was walking back from Subway, two men approached him. They were wearing ski masks and MAGA hats according to his account. One was white and one was black, though he couldn't see their faces clearly. They allegedly recognized him immediately, despite the masks and the darkness. They shouted, "Aren't you that faggot Empire nigger?" Then they began their attack. They punched him in the face. They poured what he later described as bleach on him. They put a noose around his neck. And they left him there saying, "This is MAGA country." Now pause for a moment and think about this story. Two racist attackers just happened to be walking around Chicago at 2 a.m. in sub-zero temperatures. They just happened to recognize a relatively minor TV actor in the darkness. They just happened to be carrying bleach and a noose with them on their late-night walk. But it gets even stranger. After the attack, Smollett managed to walk back to his apartment. He arrived still wearing the noose around his neck. When his friend Frank Gatson arrived to check on him, Smollett was still wearing it. When the police arrived 42 minutes later, he was still wearing it. If someone attacked you and put a rope around your neck, What would be the first thing you'd do after they left? But Smollett kept it on. He kept it on while walking home. He kept it on while calling his friend. He kept it on while waiting for police to arrive. When asked why, he said he wanted the police to see exactly what his attackers had done to him. The responding officers found this suspicious from the very beginning. Officer Mohammed Baig would later testify that keeping the noose on for so long was unusual behavior for an attack victim. Most people would remove such an item immediately out of shock and discomfort, but the story was already taking on a life of its own. Within hours, it had spread across social media. Justice for Jussie began trending worldwide. Celebrities lined up to express their outrage and support. Kamala Harris tweeted that it was an attempted modern-day lynching. The media coverage was immediate and extensive. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and every major network led with the story. It had everything that makes for compelling television: a celebrity victim, a hate crime in Trump's America, and a shocking level of brutality that seemed to confirm everyone's worst fears about the political climate. But while the nation was rallying around Jussie Smollett, the Chicago Police Department was beginning what would become one of the most thorough investigations in the city's recent history. And what they found would shock everyone, including themselves. The Chicago Police Department assigned Detective Mohammed Baig and his team to investigate what initially seemed like a straightforward hate crime case. They had no reason to doubt Smollett's story at first. He was a victim of what appeared to be a brutal racist and homophobic attack. But experienced detectives develop instincts over years of investigating crimes, and from the very beginning, small details about Smollett's account didn't sit right with the investigators. First, there was the location and timing. Streeterville, where Smollett lived, is one of Chicago's safest and most affluent neighborhoods. It's well-lit, well-patrolled, and has excellent security camera coverage. The idea that two racist attackers would choose this area for their crime seemed unlikely. Then there was the weather factor. The night of January 29th was so cold that most of Chicago resembled a ghost town. The few people brave enough to venture outside did so quickly and with purpose. The idea that attackers would be lurking around looking for victims in such conditions seemed far-fetched. Detective Baig decided to start with the basics: security camera footage. In a neighborhood like Streeterville, there should be dozens of cameras that captured at least part of Smollett's journey. The team began the painstaking process of collecting and reviewing footage from every possible angle. What they found was puzzling. They could see Smollett leaving his building. They could see him walking toward the subway. But in all the hours of footage from multiple cameras, they couldn't find a single clear image of his attackers. Not approaching him, not attacking him, and not fleeing the scene. This was strange because the attack allegedly happened on Lower North Water Street, a well-monitored area with several security cameras. If two men had attacked someone there, especially in such a dramatic fashion with bleach and a noose, there should have been some visual evidence. They reviewed footage from a wider radius around the alleged attack site. They looked at traffic cameras, CTA cameras, private business cameras, and residential building security systems. They spent hundreds of hours reviewing thousands of hours of footage. Still nothing. No sign of the attackers anywhere. No sign of the attackers anywhere. Meanwhile, the investigation was expanding in other directions. Detectives interviewed Smollett multiple times, asking him to walk them through every detail of that night. They asked him to retrace his steps to provide more specifics about his attackers and to help them understand exactly what happened. With each interview, small inconsistencies began to emerge. Details that didn't quite match up with previous statements. Timeline issues that didn't align with phone records and security footage. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make experienced detectives take notice. The breakthrough came when investigators decided to focus on the items used in the attack. The bleach and the noose weren't random weapons of opportunity. Someone had planned this attack in advance. Someone had gathered these specific items for a specific purpose. Detectives began canvassing local stores looking for anyone who might have purchased bleach rope or other materials that could have been used in the attack. This is standard procedure in cases involving unusual weapons or tools. The The search led them to a Crafty Beaver hardware store in the North Loop area of Chicago. On January 25th, 4 days before the attack, security footage showed 2 men purchasing items including rope ski masks, red hats, and other materials. The 2 men on the footage were Nigerian brothers Abel and Ola Osundairo. This discovery would crack the case wide open because these weren't random strangers. They were people who knew Jussie Smollett personally. Abel Osundairo had worked as an extra on the Empire set. He was also Smollett's personal trainer and drug dealer. His brother Ola was also familiar with Smollett and the Empire production. The 3 men had a relationship that went back several years. When detectives brought the Osundairo brothers in for questioning on February 13th, they initially denied any involvement in the attack. But faced with security footage, credit card records, and phone evidence linking them to the materials used in the alleged crime, they quickly changed their stories. What they told investigators was stunning. According to the brothers, Jussie Smollett had paid them $3,500 to stage the attack on him. He had specifically requested that they make it look like a hate crime, complete with racial slurs, homophobic language, and MAGA references. The brothers provided detailed accounts of how Smollett had planned the entire incident. He had given them specific instructions about what to say, what to do, and how to make the attack look convincing while ensuring he wouldn't be seriously injured. According to their testimony, Smollett had even driven them to the location a few days before to scout the area and plan the attack route. He had pointed out security camera blind spots and discussed timing to minimize the chances of being caught on footage. The motive, according to the brothers, was Smollett's frustration with his career and his desire to gain sympathy and publicity. He believed that being the victim of a high-profile hate crime would increase his public profile and potentially lead to better opportunities in Hollywood. But the brothers' testimony was just the beginning. Investigators now had to verify their claims and build a case that would hold up in court. They returned to the evidence with fresh eyes, looking for proof that the attack was staged rather than real. The phone records became crucial. Smollett's phone showed extensive communication with the Osundairo brothers in the days leading up to the attack. Text messages discussed meeting times, locations, and other details that supported the brothers' account. Bank records showed that Smollett had written a check to Abel Osundairo for $3,500 shortly before the attack. When questioned about this payment, Smollett claimed it was for personal training services, but the amount and timing seemed suspicious, especially given the brothers' allegations. The security camera footage that had initially seemed to exonerate Smollett now told a different story. Investigators found footage of the brothers in the area before and after the attack, moving in patterns consistent with their testimony about staging the incident. Even more damaging was footage from the ride-sharing service that showed the brothers traveling to and from the area around the time of the attack. Their movements matched their account of the staged incident perfectly. The physical evidence also supported the staging theory. The amount of bleach on Smollett's clothing was minimal, far less than would be expected from someone who had a large quantity thrown on them. The rope around his neck showed no signs of being pulled tight or causing injury. Medical records from Smollett's hospital visit showed only minor injuries, a small scratch on his cheek and some irritation from the bleach. For someone who claimed to have been brutally attacked by 2 large men, the injuries were surprisingly minimal. As the evidence mounted, investigators became convinced that they were dealing with a hoax rather than a hate crime. What emerged was a picture of an elaborate deception that involved careful planning, multiple participants, and a sophisticated understanding of how to manipulate media coverage and public opinion. The question now wasn't whether the attack was real. The evidence clearly showed it wasn't. The question was whether they could prove that Jussie Smollett had orchestrated the entire thing and whether a jury would convict him based on the evidence they had gathered. The unraveling of Jussie Smollett's fabricated hate crime sent shockwaves through every level of American society, from Hollywood to the highest offices of government, As investigators continued piecing together the elaborate deception, the true scope of Smollett's manipulation became clear, revealing a calculated scheme designed to exploit the country's deepest social and political divisions for personal gain. The immediate aftermath of the revelations was chaotic, as everyone who had publicly supported Smollett scrambled to distance themselves from what was now obviously a hoax. Major celebrities who had tweeted their outrage and solidarity found themselves deleting posts and issuing carefully worded statements. Politicians who had used the incident to make broader points about hate in America suddenly went silent on the topic, while news organizations that had covered the story extensively were forced to examine how they had been so thoroughly deceived. What made the situation even more damaging was the discovery that Smollett had continued lying even after being confronted with overwhelming evidence of his deception. During multiple police interviews, he maintained his innocence and even expressed anger that investigators would question his credibility. This defiant attitude persisted even as the evidence against him became undeniable, suggesting a level of narcissism and detachment from reality that disturbed even experienced investigators. The Chicago Police Department held a press conference to announce Smollett's arrest and the charges against him, which included disorderly conduct for filing a false police report. Superintendent Eddie Johnson's statement was particularly scathing, as he described how Smollett had wasted valuable police resources and damaged the credibility of real hate crime victims. Johnson revealed that the investigation had consumed over 1,400 man-hours and cost the city hundreds of thousands of dollars in overtime and resources. The superintendent's anger was palpable as he explained how detectives had worked around the clock, believing they were hunting dangerous criminals who posed a threat to public safety. Instead, they discovered they had been chasing ghosts in an elaborate theatrical performance designed to boost one man's career and public profile. The betrayal felt by the investigating officers was evident as they realized they had been unwitting participants in Smollett's staged drama. Legal experts immediately began analyzing the charges against Smollett and the potential penalties he faced, which could include fines, imprisonment, and restitution to the city of Chicago for the costs of the investigation. The disorderly conduct charges were just the beginning, as federal prosecutors were also considering mail fraud charges related to the threatening letter he had sent to himself. This federal case could result in much more severe penalties, including years in federal prison. The entertainment industry's reaction was swift and decisive, as the producers of Empire announced they were removing Smollett's character from the final episodes of the season. While they initially tried to maintain some distance from the controversy, it became clear that his continued presence on the show was untenable, given the nature of the charges against him. His talent agency, CAA, also dropped him as a client, effectively ending his mainstream entertainment career. But the damage extended far beyond Smollett's personal and professional consequences, as his hoax had potentially undermined years of progress in raising awareness about legitimate hate crimes. Activists and advocacy groups expressed frustration that his false report would now be used by skeptics to question the credibility of real victims' hate crime. Statistics showed that such incidents were actually increasing across the country. But Smollett's deception provided ammunition for those who wanted to dismiss these concerns. The political ramifications were equally significant, as politicians who had rushed to condemn the attack now found themselves in awkward positions, having to explain how they had been so easily deceived. Some admitted they had spoken too quickly without waiting for all the facts, while others doubled down and tried to argue that even though this particular incident was fake, it still highlighted real problems in American society. The media's role in amplifying Smollett's false narrative also came under intense scrutiny, as critics pointed out how major news organizations had accepted his story at face value without sufficient skepticism or fact-checking. The rush to cover what seemed like a compelling story had led to sloppy journalism that failed to notice obvious inconsistencies in Smollett's account. This became part of a larger conversation about media bias and the pressure to publish stories that confirm predetermined narratives. Social media platforms where the story had initially gone viral became battlegrounds for competing interpretations of what the hoax revealed about American society. Some users argued it proved that claims of widespread racism were exaggerated, while others insisted that the existence of one false report didn't negate the reality of discrimination. The incident became a Rorschach test where people saw confirmation of their existing beliefs regardless of the specific facts. The psychological aspects of Smollett's behavior fascinated experts who tried to understand what would motivate someone to orchestrate such an elaborate deception. Some suggested he suffered from narcissistic personality disorder and craved attention at any cost, while others pointed to the pressures of fame and the entertainment industry as contributing factors. The fact that he continued lying even when confronted with irrefutable evidence suggested a disconnect from reality that went beyond simple opportunism. Legal proceedings moved forward as Smollett was formally charged and released on bond while maintaining his innocence through his legal team. His attorneys argued that he was the victim of a rush to judgment and that the evidence against him had been misinterpreted. They suggested that the Osundairo brothers were the real culprits who had attacked Smollett and then blamed him when caught by police. But this explanation became increasingly implausible as more details emerged. The case also raised questions about prosecutorial priorities and whether the resources devoted to investigating and prosecuting Smollett were proportionate to his crimes. While filing a false police report is certainly illegal, some critics argued that the intense focus on this case was itself a form of political theater designed to distract from more serious issues. Others countered that the high-profile nature of the hoax and its potential impact on social cohesion justified the extensive investigation. Community leaders in Chicago expressed particular frustration with Smollett's actions, as the city already struggled with serious violence and crime issues that required police attention and resources. The fact that detectives had spent weeks chasing a fictional crime while real victims awaited justice highlighted the practical consequences of false reporting beyond just the legal and political implications. The impact on the LGBTQ and Black communities was especially profound, as many members felt betrayed by someone they had viewed as an advocate and role model. Smollett had built his public persona around fighting discrimination and injustice, making his fabrication feel like a personal betrayal to those who had supported him. Advocacy groups worried that his actions would make it harder for real victims to be believed and taken seriously. The case also highlighted broader questions about the relationship between celebrity activism and authentic social justice movements. While many entertainers had used their platforms effectively to raise awareness about important issues, Smollett's hoax raised questions about the motivations behind celebrity activism and whether fame-seeking sometimes masqueraded as genuine commitment to social change. The legal proceedings that followed Jussie Smollett's arrest became almost as controversial and bizarre as the original hoax itself, creating a second wave of public outrage and political controversy that extended the story's impact far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. In a shocking turn of events that left legal experts and the public bewildered, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office dropped all charges against Smollett in March 2019, just 3 weeks after he had been indicted on 16 felony counts. This unexpected dismissal of charges came without any admission of guilt from Smollett, and with minimal explanation from prosecutors, leading to immediate speculation about political interference and behind-the-scenes deal-making. State's attorney Kim Foxx had recused herself from the case due to communications with Smollett's family, but her office's handling of the dismissal raised serious questions about equal justice under law and whether celebrities receive different treatment than ordinary citizens. The decision to drop charges was made even more controversial by the fact that Smollett was allowed to keep his $10,000 bond and was only required to perform community service, which he had already completed. This arrangement looked suspiciously like a plea deal without the typical requirements of admitting guilt or accepting responsibility. The Chicago Police Department and Mayor's office expressed outrage at the decision, with Superintendent Johnson calling it a whitewash of justice. Mayor Rahm Emanuel held a press conference where he called the prosecutor his decision an abomination and accused Smollett of using his celebrity status and connections to escape accountability. Emanuel demanded that Smollett reimburse the city for the cost of the investigation, which had grown to over $130,000 in police overtime alone. The mayor's anger reflected the broader frustration that many felt about what appeared to be a two-tiered justice system. The controversy deepened when it was revealed that former Obama administration officials, including Tina Chen, had contacted State's Attorney Fox on behalf of Smollett's family, asking her to transfer the case to federal authorities. While these communications occurred before Fox's recusal, they raised questions about political pressure and influence peddling that would continue to dog the case for years to come. Federal authorities were not finished with Smollett, however, as a special prosecutor was appointed to investigate both the original hate crime hoax and the controversial decision to drop charges. This investigation would eventually lead to new charges being filed against Smollett, ensuring that the case would continue to generate headlines and controversy long after most people thought it was resolved. The appointment of Special Prosecutor Dan Webb marked a new chapter in the saga, as his investigation had a broader mandate that included examining the conduct of the state's attorney's office in dismissing the original charges. This investigation would take over 2 years to complete and would ultimately result in a detailed report criticizing the prosecutor's handling of the case and the decision to dismiss charges without proper justification. Meanwhile, Smollett attempted to rebuild his career and public image, but found that the entertainment industry had largely closed its doors to him. Empire producers made it clear he would not be returning to the show, while other projects dried up as studios and networks decided he was too toxic to work with. His attempts to position himself as the real victim in the situation fell flat with the public, who had seen too much evidence of his deception. The civil lawsuit filed by the city of Chicago, seeking reimbursement for investigation costs, added another layer of legal jeopardy for Smollett, as city attorneys argued he should pay not just the direct costs, but also punitive damages for his fraudulent conduct. This lawsuit kept the case in the news while also creating financial pressure on Smollett, who was no longer earning his substantial Empire salary. In February 2020, Special Prosecutor Webb announced new charges against Smollett, including 6 counts of disorderly conduct for making false reports to police. These charges covered the same basic conduct as the original case, but were filed by a different prosecutor, his office ensuring that the case would finally proceed to trial. Smollett's legal team immediately criticized the new charges as double jeopardy and politically motivated, but their legal challenges were unsuccessful. The COVID-19 pandemic delayed the trial proceedings, but also gave Smollett time to attempt various public relations strategies to rehabilitate his image. He gave selective interviews maintaining his innocence and portraying himself as the victim of a biased criminal justice system. However, these efforts were largely unsuccessful, as public opinion remained strongly against him based on the overwhelming evidence of his deception. When the trial finally began in November 2021, it provided the first comprehensive public airing of all the evidence against Smollett, including testimony from the Osundairo brothers, detailed financial records and communications that clearly showed the planning and execution of the hoax. The prosecution presented a methodical case that left little doubt about Smollett's guilt, while his defense team struggled to provide any credible alternative explanation for the evidence. The most damaging testimony came from Abel Osundairo, who described in detail how Smollett had recruited him and his brother to stage the attack, including specific instructions about what to say and how to make it look realistic. Osundairo's testimony was corroborated by phone records, financial transactions, and other evidence, making it virtually impossible for the defense to discredit. Perhaps most remarkably, Smollett took the stand in his own defense and continued to maintain his innocence. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, his testimony was widely viewed as disastrous, as he appeared evasive and unconvincing. While failing to provide any reasonable explanation for the evidence proving his guilt, legal experts noted that criminal defendants rarely testify unless they have compelling reasons to do so, and Smollett's decision to take the stand suggested desperation. The jury deliberated for just 9 hours before finding Smollett guilty on 5 of the 6 charges against him. The quick verdict reflected the strength of the prosecution's case and the jury's conclusion that Smollett's testimony was not credible. The conviction carried potential prison time and guaranteed that Smollett would face additional legal consequences beyond the damage already done to his career and reputation. At sentencing in March 2022, Judge James Lynn delivered a scathing rebuke of Smollett's conduct, calling him a narcissist who had damaged the credibility of real hate crime victims. The judge sentenced him to 150 days in jail, plus probation and fines. Though Smollett was released after serving only 6 days pending appeal, the judge's comments reflected the broader view that Smollett's hoax had caused harm far beyond the immediate costs to the police investigation. The lasting impact of the Jussie Smollett case extends far beyond one man's failed attempt at career advancement, as it became a symbol of how easily false narratives can spread in the social media age and how political polarization makes people eager to believe stories that confirm their existing beliefs. The case also highlighted questions about celebrity privilege, prosecutorial discretion, and the importance of thorough investigation before rushing to judgment. For real hate crime victims, the Smollett hoax created additional burdens as they now face increased skepticism from law enforcement and the public, who may wonder whether reported incidents are genuine. Advocacy groups continue to emphasize that false reports are extremely rare and that the existence of one high-profile hoax should not be used to dismiss legitimate cases, but the damage to public trust was real and lasting. The case ultimately serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming guilt or innocence based on initial reports and the importance of allowing investigations to be completed before drawing conclusions. It also demonstrates how the intersection of celebrity culture, political polarization, and social media can amplify both real injustices and fabricated ones, making it more important than ever to maintain healthy skepticism while still taking serious allegations seriously until proven otherwise.